All right, guys, so I wanted to pick back up with our read aloud that we have been reading in class. The book that we were reading was Auggie and Me. So we're going to pick back up with that, but I wanted to give a little recap of where we were before I start reading so that some of my friends who may have forgotten, it's been a long time since we read, we were reading from the perspective of Julian. If you remember, Julian was not very nice to Auggie in the first book, and now we're kind of getting another look at his character, kind of seeing him from a different light and kind of his side of things with all of the events that happened in the first book. He had gone for summer break to stay with his grandma in Europe, I guess, and she was telling him the story about how there was a boy at her school that kind of reminded her of Auggie because he was kind of telling her a story. So we were listening to how he kind of was helping. The boy's name was Torto, and how he was helping Julian's grandma during a very scary time, a time of war. And so we're gonna pick back up with the chapter called Torto, after he kind of helped Julian's grandma escape. So here we go. Grandmere was silent for a few seconds. She was looking into the air like she could see it all happening again right in front of her. Now I understood why she'd never talked about this before. It was too hard for her. Torto's family had me for 2 years in that barn, she continued slowly, even though it was so dangerous for them. We were literally surrounded by Germans, and the French police had large headquarters in the Danvilliers. But every day, I thanked my maker that that barn was my home and that food that Torto managed to bring me, even when there were hardly any food to go around. People were starving in those days, Julian, and yet they fed me. It was a kindness that I will never forget. It is always brave to be kind, but in those days, such kindness could cost you your life. Graymere started to get teary-eyed at this point. She took my hand. The last time I saw Torto was 2 months before the liberation. He had brought me some soup, and it wasn't even soup. It was a little water with a little bit of bread and onions in it. We had lost so much weight. I was in rags. So much for my pretty clothes. Even so, we managed to laugh, Torto and I. We laughed about things that happened in our school. Even though I could not go to there anymore, of course, Torto still went every day. And at night, he would tell me everything that he had learned so I could stay smart. He would tell me about all my old friends, too, and how they were doing. They all still ignored him, of course, and he never revealed to any of them that I was alive. No one could know. No one could be trusted. But Torto was an excellent narrator, and he made me laugh a lot. He could do wonderful imitations, and he even had funny nicknames for all my friends. Imagine that. Torto was making fun of them. I had no idea you were so mischievous, I told him. All those years you were probably laughing at me behind my back, too. Laughing at you? He said. Never. I liked you. I never laughed at you. Besides, I only laughed at the kids who made fun of me. You never made fun of me. You simply ignored me. I called you Torto. And so? Everyone called me that. I don't really mind. I like crabs. Oh, Torto, I'm so ashamed, I answered. And I remember I covered my face with my hands. At this point, Grandma covered her face with her hands, and although her fingers were bent with arthritis now, I could see her veins, and I pictured her younger hands covering her face so many years ago. Torto took my hands with his own, she continued slowly, and he held my hands for a few seconds. Grandma closed her eyes, and she took a deep breath. I said to him, I don't want to call you Torto anymore. What's your name? Grandma opened her eyes and looked at me. Can you guess what he said? She asked. I raised my eyebrows as if to say, no, how would I know? Then she closed her eyes again and smiled. He said, my name is Julian. Can you believe that? Oh my gosh. So now we kind of understand where Julian's name comes from. And it's kind of a similar situation. I think that's kind of, ironic that he was having such a hard time with Auggie, but now here he is, hearing a similar story from his grandma. So I'm going to read one more chapter and we'll kind of see where it goes from here. The next chapter is called Julian. Oh my gosh, I cried. That's why you named Dad Julian. Even though everyone calls him Jules, that was his name. Oui, she said, nodding. And I'm named after Dad, I said. So I'm named after this kid? That's so cool. She smiled and ran her fingers through my hair, but she didn't say anything. Then I remember her saying, the last time I saw Torto. So what happened to him? I asked. To Julian. Almost instantaneously, tears rolled down Grimmer's cheeks. The Germans took him, she said, that same day. He was on his way to school. They were making another sweep of the village that morning, and by now Germany was losing the war, and they knew it. But, they said, he wasn't even Jewish. They took him because he was crippled, she said between sobs. I'm sorry, I know you told me that English word is bad, but I don't know another word for it. And that's why they took him. He was not perfect. She practically spat the word out. They took all the imperfects from the village that day. It was a purge. The gypsies, the shoemaker's son, and Julian, my torteau. She stopped to wipe her eyes with a handkerchief and then continued. His parents were devastated, of course. Mr. Baumier and Madame Baumier, she continued. We didn't find out until after the liberation, but we knew. We knew. She dabbed her eyes. I lived with him for another year after the war. They treated me like a daughter. They were the only ones who helped track down Papa, although it took some time to find him. So much chaos in those days. When Papa finally was able to return to Paris, I went to live with him. But I always visited the Baumiers, even when they were very old, and I never forgot the kindness they showed me. She sighed, and she had finished her story. Grandmere, I said, after a few minutes. That's like the saddest thing I ever heard. I didn't even know you were in the war. I mean, Dad's never talked about any of this. She shrugged. I think it's very possible that I never told your father this story, she said. I don't like to talk about sad things, you know. In some ways, I'm still the frivolous girl I used to be. But when I heard you talking about that little boy in your school, I could not help but think of Torteau and how afraid I had once been of him, how badly we had treated him because of his deformity. Those children had been so mean to him, Julian. It breaks my heart to think of it. When she said that, I don't know, something just really broke inside me, completely unexpected. I looked down, and all of a sudden, I started to cry. And when I say started to cry, I don't mean a few tears rolling down my cheeks. I mean like full-scale, snot-filled crying. Julian, she said softly. I shook my head and covered my face with my hands. I was terrible, Grandmere, I whispered. I was so mean to Auggie. I'm so sorry, Grandmere. Julian, she said again, look at me. No, look at me, mon cher. She took my face in her hands and forced me to look at her. I felt so embarrassed. I couldn't look her in the eyes, and then suddenly, the word that Mr. Tushman had used, the word that everyone kept trying to force on me, came like a shout. Remorse. Yep, there it was, the word in all its glory. Remorse. I was shaking with remorse. I was crying with remorse. Julian, said Grammer, we all make mistakes. No, you don't understand, I said. It wasn't just one mistake. I was those kids who were mean to Torteau. I was the bully, Grammer. It was me. She nodded. I called him a freak. I laughed behind his back. I left me notes, I screamed. Mom kept making excuses for why I did that stuff, but there wasn't any excuse. I just did it, and I don't even know why. I don't even know. I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak. Grandmere just stroked my head and hugged me. Julian, she said softly, you were so young. The things you did, you know they were not right. But that does not mean you're not capable of doing right. It only means that you chose to do wrong. This is what I mean when I say you made a mistake. It was not the same with me. I made a mistake with Torteau. But the good thing about life, Julian, she continued, is that we can fix our mistakes sometimes. We learn from them. We get better. I never made a mistake like the one I made with Torteau again. Not with anyone in my life. And I have had a very, very long life. You will learn from your mistake too. You must promise yourself that you will never behave like you did with anyone else again. One mistake does not define you, Julian. Do you understand me? You must simply act better next time. I nodded, but I still cried for a long, long time after that. So I'm going to pause here. So it kind of is a relief to me that Julian is now kind of seeing that what he was doing was wrong, and he kind of wasn't trying to be the victim anymore, kind of make excuses. And so I feel very proud of Julian that he's kind of come to this realization, and hopefully he can act on it, and maybe in the next couple of chapters maybe he'll reach out to Auggie, or maybe he'll try to right his wrong somehow, but I will be interested to find out next time.